Hello guys, this is part 119 of ASP.NET video series. In this video, we will discuss about caching in ASP.NET. Caching improves the performance and scalability of an application. Caching is the technique of storing frequently used data pages in memory. Let's understand caching practically with an example. Let me show you this third presentation slide precisely. So now let's flip to SQL Server Management Studio. We will be using this table products, TBL product. So let me first create the database. I have given it as sample 13. You may give any name to it. Let me execute it. Let's select sample and now execute this. So we will be using this TBL products table in this demo. So let's go ahead and create this table. And this table has got 3 columns, and this table has got 3 columns: ID, name and description, ID, name and descriptions of the product. And let's go ahead and insert some sample data into this table using this insert script. So let me execute this script, insert script. And finally, let's go ahead and create this stored procedure. So where is this stored procedure? Create this stored procedure. This stored procedure which simply returns ID, name and description. Simply return ID, name and description columns from table TBL products. Okay, and now since this is a very simple table with 4 columns within that, with 4 rows within that, when we execute this stored procedure, stored procedure. The stored procedure will be executed in less than a second. So let me execute this. Okay. So it execute less than a second. As you can see it here. Look at the time, less than a second. Now in real time, we we may have tables with huge amounts of data, and we may be joining multiple tables. So the queries before they actually return data, they might take some time. So obviously, to introduce some artificial query processing time, I'm going to use wait for delay. I'm going to use wait for delay in SQL Server. So there is something called wait for delay. So we are intentionally blocking the execution of this stored procedure for certain duration. I want to block it for 0 hours, 0 minute, and 5 seconds. So what we need to do here, wait for delay. Zero hours, 0 minute, and 5 seconds. Okay, so basically hours, minutes, and seconds. So we are blocking the execution of this stored procedure for 5 seconds. So let me go ahead and alter this. So let me go ahead and alter this procedure. So use the so execute it. If we execute this stored procedure as you might expect it is going to take at least 5 seconds. It is going to take at least 5 seconds. Look at this, it is still executing, but it took 5 seconds until it is 5 seconds. We would not get the data back. Okay, so now let's go ahead and invoke this stored procedure from ASP.NET Web Application. So let's flip to Visual Studio. So open up the Visual Studio 2022. Where is the Visual Studio? We will be using ASP.NET Web Application. So create a new project, and we want ASP.NET Web Application. Here it is. So we will choose this first one, template, ASP.NET Web Application, .NET Framework, C hash. So double click it and name it as demo. And choose the path. Go to the desktop, and we will choose our folder. Here it is. Select folder. So we got our folder. Now create web form. So we will delete some files from the application. It's taking too much time. It will create. Okay. Now from here we need to delete some file from here. Delete this. We don't need this. Delete the unwanted files or folder. Delete this one also. You need to delete this also. And this folder should also be deleted. Okay. Now what you need to do? You also need to delete this web config file. Now what? First of all, you need to comment these lines. Now go back to the folder, and here you need to add a web.config file. Where is the web config file? Here it is. Web config file. Let me add this. Now add a form here. Web form. Where is the web form? Here it is. And name it as, keep it as default web form 1 .axpx. So add it. Okay, on this web form, let's go ahead and drag and drop a grid view. We need to drag and drop a grid view here. So let me specify here div style is equal to font family Arial. Now let now let's drag and drop a grid view. Here is the grid view. Grid view is under data tab. Here is the grid view. Here it is. So we have drag and dropped grid view control here, which can display the data from table products, TBL products table. Okay, and then let's go ahead and auto format this. So that it looks little better. And then along with the data, I also want to print the server side time and client side time. Okay, and to print the server side time, I am going to have a label control here. So to print the server side time, I am going to have a label control here. So where is the label? It is here. So let's drag and drop label control onto this web form. I have already dragged and dropped it, and let's get rid of that default text label. Let's get rid of default text label. Okay. All right. So what we basically want to do is in this grid view control, we want to invoke that stored procedure. We want to invoke that stored procedure and display data from TBL table. TBL products table. And just to speed things up, I have this edu.net code already typed again. So where is the edu.net? Here it is. Let me copy that and paste it in the code behind file. I have this. In this video, we are discussing about caching. In this video, we are discussing about caching. We discuss about edu.net in edu.net video tutorial and SQL Server concept like creating tables, executing stored procedure, etc. in SQL Server video tutorial. If you are new to SQL Server, and you know edu.net, I strongly recommend to watch videos in SQL Server videos tutorial and edu.net tutorial. Okay, so now let's go ahead and copy this edu.net code, which I have already copied and pasted in, which is simply is going to execute this stored procedure, which is simply going to execute this stored procedure that we have just written. Okay, so if you look at this edu.net code, it is pretty simple and straightforward. It is pretty simple and straightforward. All we are doing is reading the connection string. We are reading the connection string. We are reading the connection string from web.config file. So within web.config file, we are reading this db connection string. So first, let me copy and paste this connection string here and paste it in the web config file which we have added. So this is the connection string, db connection string. Connection string, and then storing it that in this variable, and storing it that in this variable connection string, in this variable connection string, which we are then using to create a SQL connection, which we are using to create a SQL connection. Which we are then using to create a SQL connection object, and we are using SQL data adapter object. We are using SQL data adapter object to execute this sp get products to execute this sp get product stored procedure which we have just returned, which we have just returned, and we are telling the command type, and we are telling the command type, and we are telling the command type is stored procedure. Command type is, we are telling command type is stored procedure, and creating a new data set, and creating a new data set, filling that data set with the data, filling that data set with the data. I know that we get, after executing this, sp get products, sp get product. Get product stored procedure, and then we are setting the data set as the data source for the grid view 1. Okay, we are setting the data set as the data source for the grid view, and invoke the data bind, and invoke the data bind method. And finally, I also want to set the text of this label 1 control. And finally, I want to set the text of this label 1 control. So if you look at this on this web form, we have this label 1. So if you look at this web form, we have this label 1 control, on which I want to print the current date and time on the web server. And to do that, I'm setting the text property of this label to datetime.now. Date time dot now, which is going to give me the current date and time on the web server, and then convert that to string. Okay, so we have the date and time from the web server, but on the client machine, how do we retrieve the date and time? On the client machine, now we know that HTML and JavaScript, they get executed or interpreted on the client machine, on the client browser. Okay, so obviously to retrieve the current date and time on the client machine, I can use the JavaScript code. Okay, so here within the ASPX of this web form, ASPX of this web form, I am going to split. I am going to split. JavaScript code split JavaScript code here next to client time. Now look at this on the server side. Now look at on the server side. If you want to write something to the response stream, how do we do that? We use the response dot write response dot write method response dot write method. Similarly, if you want to write something using JavaScript, then I can use the document then I can use the document object of JavaScript, you know, of the browser. So I am going to use the document object and then this document object. So before that, we actually have to specify that we are going to write some script here. So I have to use the script tag. So whatever we write within this, closing and opening tag, script. So whatever we write within this closing and opening tag is going to be JavaScript. So I am going to use the document object and the write method of document object to basically write the current date and time. So the next question is how do we retrieve the current date and time on the client machine using the date function, the date JavaScript function. That's it. So using the date function, that's it. We are done. Okay, now if you are wondering what is this client time and server side time, it is actually very simple to understand. Now look at this. Let's say I am at the moment in London. Let's say I am at the moment in London and I am accessing Gmail. Let's say the web server of Gmail is in, let's say the web server of Gmail is in North America. Okay, so when I request a login page of Gmail, the code associated with that login page is executed. The server side C# code that is executed. On the web server that is in North America. So there might be a different time. So there might be a different time at the moment, and then whatever HTML is generated on that web server, that is then sent back to the client who is sitting in the London. Okay. So on my client machine, on my laptop, this HTML JavaScript gets interpreted and executed, and then I want the time to be, printed whatever time is on my current machine. That's it. The client time. And whatever the time on the web server and whatever the time on the web server is the server side time. So obviously this date and time now will calculate this date and time now will calculate the date time on the web server, whereas the this date and time whereas this date function, the JavaScript code which executes on the client machine is going to retrieve the current date and time on the client machine. Okay, so now let's go ahead and run this. So now let's go ahead and run this. So obviously, as you might expect, this page is going to take at least 5 seconds to render. So so obviously, so obviously, as you might expect, this page is going to take at least 5 seconds to render. Why? Because the stored procedure is taking at least 5 seconds. And look at this. When I request this web form, there are lots of things happening. There are lots of things that are happening on this web server. On this web server. First, an instance of this web form. First, an instance of this web form should be created. Then it has to execute, the process, the page events. Here we only have page load events. Here we only have page load event. But in reality, you may have button click event, drop down list, selected index changed event, several events. So all the page level events have to be processed. This edu.NET piece of code, this edu.NET piece of code should be executed, which in turn has to execute the stored procedure, which which in return has to execute the stored procedure, retrieve data from the database, create other objects that are required, generate the HTML, and then send that HTML back to the client. So every time we make a request to a web server, so every time we make a request to a web server, there are series of events that has to happen, and obviously some of those could be time consuming. In this case, executing this stored procedure, in this case, executing the stored procedure is a time consuming process. It is taking at least 5 seconds. So my request processing now is at least taking 5 seconds. And look at the current date and time. And look at the current date and time on the server and on the client. On the server it is 151.23, and on the client also it is and on the client also it is 151.23. Okay, now again, if I make another request for this web form, let me open another tab and I make another request. It is going to take at least another 5 seconds because it has to process all those events again. Okay, look at that. So let me copy and paste it and open it. Let me open another tab and I make another request. It is going to take at least another 5 seconds because it has to process all those events again. Okay, look at that. Now you know the time is 155:43. 155:43. And similarly 155:43 here. Okay. Now let's see how to cache this web form. Let's see how to cache this web form and what happens when we cache it, and what happens when we cache it. Okay, so to cache the web form, all we have to do is use the output cache page directive. Okay, so I am going to use the output cache directive. Okay, and this output cache directive has got two mandatory attributes. So output cache, it has two mandatory attributes: duration. This duration attribute controls how long this web form is going to be cached. Okay, for now I am going to set duration to 30, meaning this web form is going to be cached for 30 seconds. And then there is another mandatory attribute called vary by param. Vary by param. Okay, for now I am going to set the value for this parameter to none. Okay, so when do we use vary by param and what is the purpose of that? Vary by param is basically used to cache multiple responses of this web form. Now, if you are not sure why do we need to cache multiple responses, we will understand that in our next video session. Okay, for now just understand that vary by param is used to cache multiple responses. In our next video session, we will discuss about how when to cache multiple responses for a given web form. The duration attribute obviously controls, the number of seconds that is web form has to be cached. In this case, since we have set this value is 30, it is going to cache for 30 seconds. So now let's go ahead and request this web form. Now let's go ahead and request this web form. Now we don't have this web form in cache. Now we don't have this web form in cache. So so obviously so obviously now if I request this web form, so copy this and close this one. And so obviously now if I request this web form, when I press enter, means if I copy this and paste it here and press enter, the web form has to be processed. All the events have to be processed. The HTML is generated, and obviously it is going to take at least 5 seconds. Okay, and then when that HTML is sent back, so it will take 5 seconds. 5 seconds, okay. And then when that HTML is sent back, a copy of that HTML is also stored in the memory, in the web server. In the web server memory. So now look at this, since we have cached this for 30 seconds, if I request this web form, now look at this, as soon as I press enter, the response comes back within less than second. So if I copy this, look at this, as soon as I press the enter, I had already wasted time there. So if I paste it here, look at that. Now look at this, as soon as I press enter, the response come back within less than a second. That is because the response for this webform 1.axpx now is cached. Now is cached on the web server. So when I make a request for that webform 1.axpx, what is going to happen? What is going to happen? So if I make a request for this web form, so I make a request for this web form, for that web form .axpx, what is going to happen? It is not going to execute all this piece of code. It is not going to execute all this piece of code again. Okay, it is simply going to return whatever HTML that is cached in the web server memory. Okay, so we get the same HTML back. And how can we prove that we got a cached response back? Very simple. Look at this. Let me close the first window. Let me close first window. Okay, so this is the first time. So this is the first time. So this is the first time when we. So this is the first time when we made the request. Look at the current date and time. The server time is 2:46. 2:46. The server time is 2:46, and the client time is also the server time is 2:144, and the client time is also 2:1144. But then the second request that we made is look at the server time. It is 2:46, but the client time is 2:53. Okay, meaning the server side time did not change. No, server time is changed now. If I make another request, it is going 5 seconds. And if I again make a request, it will immediately printed. Now look at this server time side 2715, and here is also 2715, but the client time is 2715. Here is the same, but here the server time is changed. As you can see that in this request I have the server times is 2715, and the client side time is also 2715. Both are the same. But in the next request we have the same server time 2715. Okay, but the client side time is changing 2721. Okay, that is because whatever was the time when we first requested this page is the same time 2715. That is because means here is the first request. The time on the server time is 2715, and in the second request it is also the 2715. But here this client time in the first request, the client time is also same as of the server time 2715 and 2750. While in the second request the client time has changed to 721, but the server time is remained as it is as of the first request 2715 and 2715. That is because a response for this web form, that is because the request for this web form was cache. So the web form, the second request, and this piece of code, so the So this web form, the second request, when we made a second request for web form AXPX, we got the response that is cached. We got the response that is cached. And this piece of code did not get executed again. Did not get execute again. So it did not recompute the server side time. But whereas the client side time gets updated every time. Why? Because when the HTML that is sent back to the client HTML and JavaScript, the JavaScript will get executed on the client. So every time the client time changes, but within those 30 seconds, the server side time does not change. But now since the 30 seconds would have been elapsed, you know this web form, you know this web form would have been removed from the cache. So now if I copy this and then make another request, it is going to take at least 5 seconds. So if I copy and paste this and press enter, it is going to take at least 5 seconds to process the web form. Okay, look, 1 2 3 4 5. Okay, so it is going to take at least 5 seconds to process. Okay, because the initial response from the cache is removed. So now if I make another request, look at that. So I'm doing all these requests within seconds, 30 seconds. Okay, okay. So I'm doing all these requests within 30 seconds. So let me paste that. In the above showed browser, we have opened up three. Okay, so look at that. The server side time. So this is the first request. So this is the first request. This was the first request, and look at here. We have made these requested within 30 seconds. So we will see the same server time in all these four. As you can see, 2:12:19 in the first request. It is 2:12:19 in the second request. It is 2:12:19 in the third request. It is 2:12:19 in the fourth request. So in the first request, the client time changing now 2:12:19. In the second request, 2:12:19. It will be changing here 2:12:22, 2:12:28. Okay, but keep looking at the client time. It keep changing every time. But then next request I made, we have shown you this, and this is at okay 28. This is at 22. Now if it is 12:19, then if I make a request, this response for web form 1 would have been removed from the cache, because why the duration would have expired 30 seconds is the time we want to cache this. But after that, anytime in some somebody makes a request, then the web form is going to be reprocessed. So now it would have definitely been over. If you see this, it is 2/12/19. If I now make a request, it will be over 2/12/19. Okay, paste it. I'll show you. It is 2/15/23. While it was 2/12/19, and in the next it is 2/15/23. If I do again within 30 seconds, it will show the same 2/12/23 and 2/12/23. But look at the client time will also be same in this case, but here it is changing. Client time is changing to 15:39, and here it is 2/15/23. Okay, so if we request within the 30 seconds, then the server time will be remain the same. But if we request a web form after the 30 seconds, the the server time will change. So it is now past 30 seconds. If I paste now, and you will see it will take 5 seconds. Okay, now the 2/16/32 while it was 2/15/23. Okay, because the cache response is removed after 30 seconds. So now I get a new server date and time 2/15/23. But if I make another request within next 30 seconds, I'm going to get the cached response within the 30 seconds. I think 30 seconds is passed now. So it will take, if this will be new one, first request. If I request second request within the 30 seconds, we will get the same server time side. Server time 2/17/16. In the first request it is 2/17/16, and while client time 2/17/16, in the second 2/17/27. So client time is keep changing while the server time remain the same within the 30 seconds. Okay, so hopefully let's make it clear that you know this web form is cached. This web form is cached for 30 seconds. So how did we cache the web form? So how did we cache the web form? We used the output cache attribute. We use the output cache attribute. Here it is. Output cache attributes with duration attribute. Duration is equal to 30 seconds. Duration is equal to 30 seconds. Meaning this web form is going to be cached for the next 30 seconds. So when any user requests this web form for the first time, the web server will process the web form events, execute the server will process the web form events, execute the stored procedure, retrieve data from database, create objects, generate HTML, and send that HTML to the client. browser and retains a copy of that response in memory for the next 30 seconds, and any subsequent request during that 30 second receives the cached response. Okay, after the cache duration has expired, after that 30 second has expired, the next request for the web form has to be processed, and all that event has to be processed again, and then generate a new response which is then cached for another 30 seconds. So this web form is processed by the server once every 30 seconds at the most. Okay, so in this video, we discuss about how to cache a web form using the output cache directive, and we have seen the duration attribute. In our next video, we will discuss about caching multiple responses for a given web form, and we will see how to use this vary by param. We will see how to use this vary by param. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.